several cards. The Five of Wands is the card we are associating with the call to the trial and return to the bardo. That's the normal way people operate in this world and have for as long as we can remember. And if you're called to the trial, and it means you're called away from the bardo, and there's a fear of returning to the bardo. There's a fear of the infinite, the formless, the divine as it truly is. Instead, we want the divine as some kind of image or preconception that we have. And so the result is Five of Wands, which is conflict, change because there's impermanence, competition, tension, and arguing. But we are called on a deeper level to try to find balance, and we'll get more into that shortly. Then we're going to talk about the King of Wands, and this is the creative force, but not driven to create, not needing to create to win love or approval. Now, when we are called to the bardo and willing to return to the trial, so that's CBRT as opposed to CTRB, the creation sought is creation itself. In other words, we're seeking the bardo, the infinite, the formless, the divine. Though we're not thrilled or driven by the need to create content or to draw attention to ourselves. And you'll see that many people in the realm of spirituality today are really focused on getting attention to themselves and just using spiritual concepts in order to get your attention. Six of Pentacles, equality, fairness, giving, and receiving. If we're called to the bardo and willing to return to the trial, it's also forgiving a lack of balance found on earth. So just as I was speaking about this pet peeve of mine, which is people who use spirituality to get money and attention and praise and escape childhood trauma perhaps, they're, in my opinion, unbalanced. And unless I can forgive that, then I'm not really being called to the bardo. Instead, I'm being called to the trial and trying to find balance by explaining or criticizing others who aren't doing things the way I think they should be done. So if we're called to the bardo, then it's forgiving a lack of balance found on earth and trusting a higher balance exists beyond space and time. That's why we're called to the bardo instead of the trial, because we're trusting that there is balance, but it won't be found through the laws of man or anything that we're going to do physically here on earth through some kind of campaign or crusade or agenda. Okay. So then we have the Knight of Swords, and you can see in this picture, sword is dipping into the water. That's not normally the way you see the sword depicted. This is someone, if we're called to the trial and fearing return to the bardo, this is someone who's confident, impulsive, visionary, and unrealistic. So they're probably really wrapped up in Maya. But if we're looking at this from called to the bardo and willing to return to the trial, then the sword, the idea is, touches into the water. So in other words, touches into the emotions. And we're remembering, especially when we feel confident, impulsive, have some kind of vision of greatness or vision of defeat, and we're being realistic or unrealistic, we are reminded that we're stuck in the mind, and so we're forgetting to make this moment about this moment, which I call the law of obedience. And so we need unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard, which allows us to make this moment about this moment, and to humbly appreciate not knowing. If we can humbly appreciate not knowing, then we can make this moment about this moment. If we can't accept not knowing, or if we think we know, then we are not going to be able to make this moment about this moment. And then the Knight of Pentacles, hardworking, practical, reliable, with call to the bardo, return to the trial, only using money to protect the horse, right? He's not carrying the money. Money's on armoring his horse, and the horse is that which we ride back to the bardo. So again, it's the use of money to serve the transcendence of money. Okay, so the Tree of Life, I've talked about it many times. I don't think I've ever given a in-depth rundown. But on the left side of the tree, we have understanding, and the shadow of that is contraction and boundaries. So if you understand something like X, you have to discard Y and Z, which would be not accurate. So there's a little bit of a limitation. And then at Sphere 8, it can be group or devoted to love from another or others, so you may deny your own needs to get love. That's the shadow of understanding. But you're so understanding, you're not understanding yourself, because it's lower consciousness at the bottom of the tree. Whereas on the right side of the tree, wisdom and creativity, purpose and expansion, and then devoted to love from the ego, so you elevate the personal will. So that's the individual, and that's the push-pull that we have going on. There can be a desire to escape the burden or test or measure how far someone's love for you will go. That's sphere 7. Negative free child, whereas sphere 8 we associate with negative adaptive child. Okay, so on the top of the tree, permanence and unity. On the bottom of the tree, impermanence and disunity. In other words, down here we're on Earth. We're called to the trial, return to the bardo. But if you're called to the bardo, you're called to permanence, you're called to unity, you're called to sphere 1. You go off the tree. You can imagine these arrows are 3-dimensional, even though I'm representing it on 2D space. But they're going in front and behind the tree, different angles, like a sphere around the tree, to go from 10 directly to 1, because you're called to the bardo. And then once you get to the top, you are willing to return to the trial and do it again. That's how the tree gets replenished. So the shadow of understanding, as we talked about, are the lower spheres, and the shadow of creativity are the lower spheres. Okay, so the farther you are from source of understanding, as you go down on the left side of the tree, or the right side of the tree, the more distant you are from the source of creativity. Your imagination is fed by your Enneagram fixation, and these Enneagram needs are ways to get safety and love via conditions. So if you're called to the bardo, loss of boundaries, merging with the sea, merging with the mystery, merging with the wild, merging with God. There can be a fantasy of conquest, surrender, union, love, or food. Even if you're called to the bardo, those things can come up as a way to kind of distract you and pull you back into Maya. If you're willing to return to the trial, if you're willing to return to reality, then we are going back to assuming boundaries, fear, and longing over the mystery, desiring land, not water, civilization, not wild, God, and not humanity. But that's just the way it is. So we want to try to set aside our fantasies of conquest, surrender, union of a physical nature, even love of another person that's conditional, food. They're all pointing to cosmic union. So we set them aside or use them as leapfrogs to get us to the higher truth. Dissolution. We may want to fall in love with a person, but really what we're looking to do is dissolve into the bardo. We want to move away from finite forms and impermanence to infinity, formlessness, and permanence. But it's not always that easy to do, and it can often be spiritual bypassing. So the knight is representative, and the king is representative of trying to understand when that's happening, forgive it, and repent to turn around. Called to the bardo. So the king is beyond fantasies of past, future, and image, getting or losing power, learning, grasping, manipulating, and needing control, and even needing to comprehend the mystery. That is the power of the king. Knights and kings use money all from a willingness to return to the trial. So we're back in the trial, money is needed, and we're generating money, but we're not being fooled into thinking that's what it's about. Boundaries are illusions, but we honor them. Boundaries of poverty, for example, boundaries of property boundaries, boundaries between people, not interfering with someone else's karma, not telling them what to do. So we play at civilization. We go to our jobs, we listen to our boss, we pay our taxes. And we have these ideas that are given to us about God, and we play along with those until we're ready to let go of them and move into the formless, the wilds, the chaos. So we forgive the fantasies of conquest, surrender, union, love, and food. As we know, they are metaphors for cosmic union and dissolution. And so we may wish to transcend finite forms and impermanence to merge with infinity, formlessness, and permanency. But in the trial, it's about immanence, not transcendence. So we see all the calls to the trial instead of calls to the bardo, and we accept it. We accept the lack of balance, sphere 6. So if we're called to the trial, that's 5 of Wands. And you can see we're moving down the tree. We're doing it, trying to find balance, but we may be looking at all the wrong places. So 5 of Wands is what we get: conflict, competition. And so that's again, this challenge that we have in the trial is that when we're called to it, we're going to find things are not going our way, or they go our way, but then we have to fight off any threats. You're called to the trial means you're called away from the bardo. You're called away from the infinite. You're called away from the place where there are no boundaries. You instead want boundaries. You're trying to find balance or cultivate balance or forgive a lack of balance within the land of boundaries, the land of earth. You're seeking conditions in the trial for self-love and for love from others. So, as a result, we're desperate to find a new source of understanding, not divine understanding, not understanding that's beyond concepts, but rather something that's conceptual. Image, basically. And we're also far away from the source of creativity. So that's where the King of Wands is so helpful, because we're not going to be seduced by them. If we're looking for understanding and creativity based on finite boundaries and conditions, we're going to have conflict and competition, Five of Wands. So if we're called to the Bardo, 4 cards came up. King of Wands, 6 of Pentacles, Knight of Swords, Knight of Pentacles. And if we're called to the trial and fearing return to the Bardo, we're going to want to forgive our lack of balance and the lack of balance we see. Right? We're going into, if we're called to the trial, we're going there actually to forgive the lack of balance, but we think we're going there to find balance within forms. If we're called to the Bardo, we just find balance non-conceptually in the present moment. So the urge to break the vows of chastity and poverty show we are lost. We are lost. We've lost obedience to make this moment about this moment. So we worry and criticize desires to break the vows. We feel this need to obey, to get others to love us. That's all negative adopted child. Or we feel a desire to conquer and escape, often by breaking the vows of chastity and poverty. So all these vows are just there to show us that we're not making this moment about this moment. And these cards are helpful to us. If we're called to the Bardo and return to the trial, we find balance in the now by seeing any thought of past, future, and image, any pride in being practical, which is the Pentacles, Knight of Pentacles, or efforts to keep the sword dry, Knight of Swords, out of the water, out of the emotion. It's just a sign that we need unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional positive self-regard, and to humbly appreciate not knowing in order to make this moment about this moment.